Hello and welcome to day 6 of 7 days of Halloween. Hi everyone, it's Monica and welcome back to day 6 of 7 days of Halloween. So today we're going to be working with this mini Halloween set, and it has some really great images that I've shared with you before. When I bought this set, I specifically bought it for this Pharmacist because I love creating apothecary themes. And yesterday we created a passport card that had the apothecary theme, but today we're going to actually stamp out a theme using this stamp set along with this window from Sizzix. Now, if you've used this window before, you've probably seen it where the top part where I have the stamped label has been on the bottom, because typically it's used for a flower pot, but we're going to actually transform it and create it into a Pharmacist window where you can see the Pharmacist standing in front of the window with his vials. So to start out, I wanted to create some sort of a background that had like a brick wall. And originally I thought I could use some texture paste and a stencil, but then I remembered I had my kit from Passport to New York that had a great brick wall, and it also had a coordinating piece of paper that had some white background. So I thought it would be perfect for the background and then also for the outer part of my apothecary store. Okay, so once I had my paper all trimmed down using my guillotine trimmer, then I went ahead and I got out my MISTI stamping platform to go ahead and stamp my stamp. Now, the ink that I'm going to be using today is black Archival ink, and that's because I may be doing some Copic coloring. So what I did is I took my window and I placed it in the middle because I wanted to make sure that when I stamp my image, you'll be able to see my Pharmacist. The Pharmacist is going to be over to the left side of the window and not right in the window, because I don't want the cross of the windowsill to be covering his face. So I want it to be somewhat strategic when I did my stamping. Now this stamp set is actually a smaller stamp from a bigger set that is actually out there in the Tim Holtz collection. And the bigger set is really great as well, but what I like about the smaller set is that it's perfect for greeting cards. If I were to have used the bigger Pharmacist, then he wouldn't have fit in this window. So I like the fact that Sizzix, along with Stampers Anonymous, keeps that in mind for us card makers, that they make smaller stamps as well, using some of the great images that are out there. So once I had my Pharmacist stamped, then I went ahead and I took my apothecary bottles and I lined it up to make sure that it wasn't completely covering the stamped area. As you can see, he has a white apron on, so I easily was able to add the stamps to hit part of that white apron and still be able to not have to worry about using some masking tape when I was stamping. Okay, so once my image was stamped, then I wanted to go ahead and start working on the window. Now the window I cut out using that Bigz die cut along with some grunge board that I had in my stash. And I'm going to be working with some vintage photo distress oxide to color up the windowsill. Now, when I'm covering it up, I'm really generous with the ink because I want to make sure that it does look really covered. The cardboard is already brown, but I wanted to make sure that I was able to get a nice layer of ink on my windowsill. And then once I have it completely covered, then I'm going to come in with my walnut stain to edge up the side of the window using my dauber. Now, whenever you see me using my walnut stain, I am typically using my finger dauber because I like the control that I have with this. I could obviously use a blending tool, but I like that I'm able to get in to some of the nooks and crannies with the blending, with the dauber that I have. So that's why I typically use that with my walnut stain. And then I'm going to do the same thing with that flower pot piece. Now, even though it's not going to be a flower pot, that's how I'm going to refer to it because I think that's how it is in the actual die set. But I went ahead and I took my Distress Oxide, again using my vintage photo, and I inked it up, and then I got my walnut stain for the edges. Now, once you have it inked up really nicely, the grunge board that I'm using is really nice to be able to stamp on. I was able to get some nice stamped impressions when I was testing out my theme, and I'm going to share that with you right now. So when I was first playing around, I knew I was going to go ahead and put the pharmacy name on the top part, but then when I was playing around a little bit, I noticed that the spider would fit perfectly on the edge of the windowsill. So I went ahead and decided to stamp a spider hanging down from the window because I think that just kind of added to the Halloween theme. So I went ahead and I used my MISTI to stamp out my spider, and as you can see, the spider didn't fit exactly on the windowsill. You might be able to line it up a little bit more centered, but I was fine with that. Typically, if you're watching a spider, he may be kind of dangling a little bit on his spider web, and you may not be able to see his feet, or his legs, I should say, completely anyway. So I was fine with it being a little bit off center. And then I was ready to go ahead and stamp onto the flower pot portion using this great label. Now, as you can see, I didn't really have any room to put my magnets, so you just want to make sure that when you are stamping, if you are using a small piece of cardboard like I'm using here, that you get a nice impression your first time around, because you may not want to stamp it a couple times for movement. I was able to put the little magnet right on the corner, so I went ahead and I took the chance of stamping it twice, and I had no problem with that. But just be aware of that if you're not able to add your magnets to hold it down in place, you may want to make sure you try to get a nice crisp impression your first stamping around. Okay, so once I had my pharmacy sign stamped, then I wanted to go ahead and add some rivets, something that looked like it would be holding the sign up. So I went ahead and took out a couple small brads, and I stamped some holes into my sign, and then I just put a couple of brads right through it. It isn't necessarily holding anything together. I just wanted it more for decoration, and that's why I just put them right in and I bended them over on the back. And then once I had my brads in, then I did use a little bit of foam tape to just raise my sign just a little bit more, because I wanted it to look somewhat like a valance. And even though it probably would have been fine the way that it was, I did want to have a little bit of lift to it, and that's when I decided to add some foam tape. Now, when I was testing out my my project, I noticed that the foam tape wasn't sticking really well to my windowsill. I'm not really sure why. I'm not sure if it was because the type of material that I used for my windowsill, it was just regular grunge board, so I'm not really sure why it wasn't sticking. So what I ended up doing is I just added some glue to the windowsill to be able to attach my foam pieces right to the glue, and that way I knew that it wouldn't move and it wouldn't come off. I was really surprised that the foam tape didn't stick to the windowsill, but it wasn't really that big of a deal. Like I said, I just got out my glue and I just used glue just to make sure that I had a nice sturdy piece. And then I'm going to go ahead and put my windowsill aside just to let it dry. All right, so with my stamped image, I know that I was going to need to trim it down because it's going to go behind that windowsill. So I just got out my guillotine trimmer and I just trimmed it down a bit. And then once I actually add it to my window, then I'll be a little bit more precise in my trimming. So I went ahead and just, again, like I said, just trimmed it down. And if you have your window, you can go ahead and kind of eyeball it just to make sure you're not cutting off too much or too little. Your windowsill is about 1/2 inch thick, so you do have some room there. But I wanted to make sure I had enough paper to adhere my window to the paper and make it look like, again, the Pharmacist was behind the window. Okay, so once I had it pretty well trimmed down, then I decided to go ahead and color up my Pharmacist along with the pharmacy bottles. And I did decide to use some of my Copic colors. So I'm going to go ahead and take a minute here to color up my Pharmacist along with the bottles. Now, if you don't have any Copic markers, then you could easily use some of your pencils. Colored pencils would work great as well. I'm not sure about distress crayons. This might be a little bit too thick to control, but you might be able to get away with some watercoloring as well. I'm not a big watercolorist, so you don't see too many videos where I'm actually watercoloring. I'll typically use my Copic colors, or I'll use my distress crayons. And distress crayons I have used for watercoloring before, but I wanted to have a little bit more control over my coloring since it is a smaller image, and that's why I decided to come in with my Copic colors. And again, I'm not real fancy when I'm using my markers. I'm just basically doing some outlining and then some minimal shading. When I am doing my coloring, I'll typically get 2 or 3 colors, and I'll start with my darker color on the outside, and then I'll bring the lighter colors towards the inside. And that's how a lot of people typically will do it. The Copic colors have the alcohol base, so you're able to do some really nice blending, and that's why you can get away with it without being a great colorist, just having some real simple techniques. So I'm going to go ahead and put on some music while I finish up my coloring here, and then I'll be back to put the card together with you. Okay, so once I finished up my coloring, then the next thing to do was to glue the window over my paper. And as you can see, I'm measuring it up just to make sure my Pharmacist picture is going to show. And then I'm going to take some of that glue that I used earlier and add that to the back of my window and go ahead and add it directly to the paper. Now, you are going to have a little bit of movement when you're using this glue, and that's why I recommend using the glue rather than some of your tape runners, because that way you can position the window perfectly. And as you can see, I had it glued to the wrong window, so I had to put that aside and grab the correct one to go ahead and add it over my image. So again, I'm just adding my glue, and then I'm going to go ahead and position it right over my window. And as you can see, I wasn't exactly straight in cutting the paper, but it really worked out fine because I was able to just lift it up a little bit to make sure that his face was showing. And then I took my scissors and I just trimmed down the excess. Now, don't worry about cutting part of that image off that you had colored. Again, you're going for the result, not necessarily the process of getting there. So even though I colored up some of that image, I ended up cutting part of it off, but in the end, I think it still worked fine, even having cutting off some of the image. And then once I had my window all ready, then it was just a matter of getting my back panel put together. And as you can see, I am making a 5x7 card, so my black cardstock is just going to be half an inch shorter than a 5x7 card, and then my brick wall is a half an inch shorter than your black cardstock. So whenever I am layering, usually that's the rule, is a half an inch between layers. And then I just went ahead and I glued down my brick wall, and then I'm going to take my MISTI and a couple more stamps to stamp a sentiment along with a hanging spider, and then I'll go ahead and I'll adhere my window to my brick wall. Now within this stamp set, there is a Happy Halloween sentiment that works great for cards, and that's the one that I'm going to use right onto my brick wall, and that's going to fit right in the top there using my MISTI along with my black Archival ink. And then once I get that stamped, then I'll be able to position my window so that way it looks like it is the side of a building. And as you can see, the ink goes on really nicely onto my cardstock. And I'm able to stamp my sentiment. And even though it is a brick wall, you can see the sentiment really easily with the black Archival ink. So even though it is a brick wall, it isn't too dark, And I think if I would have used my texture paste, then I may have had problems stamping on it. So I'm really glad that I decided to go with the designer cardstock instead. And then there's that little spider making an appearance again, just hanging off of the wall. And it is going to really coordinate nice with the window. So once I have it stamped, then it's just a matter of positioning the finished window onto my brick wall. And by creating the window separately and not having to worry about cutting out the cardstock, I think it made my life a lot easier. I was able to position the white backing behind the window so that way you could see your Pharmacist, and then that way I didn't have to worry about stamping directly on my brick wall, where it probably would have been a problem because you wouldn't have been able to see him very well. So after I got my window positioned exactly where I wanted it, then I decided I needed one more touch. And when I was looking at that brick wall, it kind of reminded me of a wall maybe in New York where it needed some graffiti. So there was another stamp set within this small Halloween stamp set that worked great as a graffiti stamp. So I went ahead and I just inked it up, and using one of the techniques that I have, I just used it holding it in my hand, and I just pressed some of the black ink right onto the wall to create somewhat of a graffiti effect. And with that, the card pretty much was complete. It was just a matter of adding the finished card base to the white cardstock, and then adding a sentiment in the inside. So I hope that you've enjoyed this card, my day 6 of 7 days of Halloween. We only have one more day left. And I haven't quite decided what I'm going to do yet, but I probably need to figure that out. So as always, let me know what you think of this card. I guess my question of the day is day 6. So what has been your favorite card so far, if you do have one? So as always, I'll leave a list of all the products that I've used to create the card along with the links to the store. Now, if you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up. And as always, I really appreciate you sticking around for my series. And as a thank you, I will be giving away something at the end of my series, and I'll be using your comments as your entry. So I haven't quite decided what I'm going to be giving away yet, but we'll figure it out a week out after the video series ends. And don't forget, you do need to be a subscriber to my channel in order to be entered into my drawing. All right, everybody, thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll see you again tomorrow for day 7 of my 7 days of Halloween.